Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tackling something literally every single one of us has faced, those deeply frustrating, sometimes agonizingly painful detours in life. We've all been stuck in that metaphorical waiting room, right? Just sitting there wondering if we've somehow been completely forgotten.
So let's just dive right in. Do you feel like your prayers are on a massive delayed detour? Because let's be real, waiting for answers is pure agony. We are wired to want immediate results, and when we don't get them, man, it is so easy to feel completely abandoned. But what if that wait isn't a mistake at all? Well, the absolute crucial point here, and it's a truth woven all throughout the biblical narrative, is this: a delay does not equal a denial. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's a highly active, divine period of preparation. The wait is actually doing something essential behind the scenes. Section 1. Delays contain divine purpose. Let's look at some of the ancient evidence for this, starting with a few famous biblical figures who didn't just wait a couple of days, but endured absolute, monumental seasons of waiting to step into their destiny. Take Abraham, for instance. He's famously out there, waiting for a promise under the stars. He had to hold on for a seemingly impossible promise, that he'd be the father of many nations. His story is just this ultimate proof that holding on to a divine vision, it requires immense faith over a remarkably long period of time. Or how about Joseph? There's a massive 22-year gap between the birth of his dream and its actual fulfillment. I mean, year 0, age 17, he gets these incredible God-given dreams. But by year 13, he isn't ruling. He's enduring slavery and literally sitting in an Egyptian prison. It's not until year 22 that his dreams are finally fulfilled and he's elevated to governor. Talk about a painful detour. But here's why that gap matters so much. Joseph's time in the pit and then the prison. It wasn't a penalty. God was actively working right in the middle of that mess. That delay prepared his leadership in the small things, it positioned him perfectly to eventually interpret the cupbearer's dream, and it developed his absolute courage to persevere. He was quite literally being prepared to manage an entire country. Moving on to Section 2. The wilderness training ground. Let's see how this builds by looking at how the wilderness shapes a leader, specifically through the incredible story of King David. And there is such a sharp contrast to highlight here. The world's view of waiting is that it's a penalty, right? It's abandonment. It's just wasted time. But God's view, God sees it as a completely necessary character training ground. It's all about preparation and positioning. So back to David. He was anointed king as a teenager, just 17 years old. But then he spent 13 grueling years hunted like a dog in the wilderness by King Saul before he actually sat on the throne at age 30. So why the huge gap? Simple. The wilderness was his ultimate customized training program. Because of that intense wilderness training, David learned incredible humility and supreme trust. So much so that later in life, when a guy named Shimei hurled stones and curses at him, not exactly the royal treatment, David was completely unruffled. He literally told his men, "Leave him alone and let him curse. Perhaps Adonai will look on my affliction and return good to me." He didn't even try to fight back. And David shows us something profound here. True security isn't found in titles or power. His incredible restraint proves that God's will is far, far more important than our ego. It tells us our honor is totally safe in God's hands. David knew he could just wait for God to act on his behalf, trusting that God's justice and goodness would settle the score right on time. Which brings us to Section 3, the Watchtower of Faith. Let's explore one more powerful historical example of active waiting and visionary faith, this time from the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk. Habakkuk actually ascended his watchtower right in the middle of deep oppression and violence, desperately crying out to God for answers. And God's response? "If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay." God was assuring him that even if the answer feels agonizingly far off, it has an appointed time. It is going to arrive right on schedule. The fundamental takeaway here is that being a visionary absolutely requires patience. Habakkuk's story teaches us that true leadership, true faith, they demand moral consistency and steadfast patience. It's all about trusting God's unfolding purpose in a troubled, messy world, even when we literally cannot see the finish line. All right, Section 4, weaving hardships into good. Let's pivot and dive into the theology that weaves all these ancient historical proofs together into a solid, unbreakable promise for us today. Remember Joseph? Well, at the very end of his incredible ordeal, he drops this famous realization on the very brothers who sold him into slavery. He says, "As for you, what you intended against me for evil, God intended for good, in order to accomplish a day like this, to preserve the lives of many people." Joseph's realization proves that God is still master over the outcomes. He actively turns human betrayal, tragedy, and painful delays into ultimate, life-saving good. And then, centuries later, the Apostle Paul echoes that exact same truth in Romans 8:28. And we know that God works all things together for the good of those who love him. Paul is basically taking Joseph's revelation and anchoring our earthly pain, our frustrating seasons of waiting, right into this magnificent theological promise. When you really look at Paul's outline here of salvation, sanctification, and sovereignty, it's kind of mind-blowing. It perfectly illustrates how God's absolute control over all circumstances connects our present, everyday struggles directly to his glorious eternal plan for our lives. The delays are, believe it or not, a mechanism of his grace. Paul continues a bit further down, writing, "For in hope we have been saved, but if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it." The Christian condition is fundamentally one of hope and perseverance, meaning we eagerly wait for our complete deliverance because we completely trust the rock-solid promises of God, even when the outcome is entirely unseen. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Practical Hope for Today. Because, sure, all this ancient history and deep theology is beautiful, but how do we actually apply this concept of active hope to our very real, gritty Tuesday morning struggles? Think about our modern waiting rooms. Maybe you're facing intense financial pressures right now, or navigating some really unexpected career delays. Maybe it's a frightening health challenge, strained relationship difficulties, or just a really long season of unanswered prayers. Whatever it is, your personal waiting room is not an accident, and it is certainly not a punishment. So here's the bottom line. We have to stop wasting the wait. We have to work in the waiting. Instead of whining or giving in to the temptation of despair, we need to practice active hope. We have to trust that our present pain is actively preparing us for future ministry and carving out a far deeper character within us, just like David out in the wilderness. Ultimately, hope is what rescues us from just giving up and losing our faith entirely. Just as Jesus meticulously restored Peter's hope after his absolute darkest hour of denial, God's divine hopefulness rescues us from despair. Especially when the messy middle of the journey feels impossibly long and tiring, hope is the anchor that keeps us moving forward. So let's wrap up with this final thought to chew on. How can you actively serve and grow in your current waiting room, rather than just passively watching the clock? Since you now know, without a doubt, that a delay is definitely not a denial, what is one step you can take today to let God build your character while you wait for his perfect timing? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today.